listening to the audiobook edition of Glimpses of World History, written by Jawaharlal Nehru and first published in 1934. This audio presentation has been created by Giribala Joshi using advanced text-to-speech technology.
Chapter 7: The Greek City-States. January 11, 1931. In my last letter I said something about the Greeks or Hellenes. Let us have another look at them and try to form some idea of what they were like. It is very difficult, of course, for us to form a real and truthful idea of something or some people whom we have never seen. We are so used to our present conditions and ways of living that we can hardly imagine an utterly different world. Yet the ancient world, whether in India or China or Greece, was utterly different from the present world. All we can do is to guess, with the help of their books and buildings and other remains, what the people in those days were like. There is one very interesting fact about Greece. The Greeks apparently did not like big kingdoms or empires. They liked little city-states, that is to say, each city was an independent state. They were little republics, with the city in the center and some fields roundabout from which the food of the city came. A republic, as you know, has no king. These Greek city-states had no kings, but were governed by the rich citizens. The average man there had little or no say in the government. There were many slaves who had no rights in the government, and women also had no rights. So that only a part of the population of the city-states were citizens, and as such could vote on public questions. It was not difficult for these citizens to vote, as all of them could be gathered together in one place. This could only be done because it was a small city-state and not a great big country under one government. Imagine all the voters of India, or even of a province like Bengal or Agra, meeting together. It simply can't be done. This difficulty had to be faced later in other countries, and a solution was found in what is called representative government. This means that instead of all the voters of a country meeting together to decide on a question, they elect their representatives, who meet together and consider public questions relating to the country and make laws for it. In this way the ordinary voter is supposed to help indirectly in the government of his country. But this has nothing to do with Greece. Greece avoided this difficult question by not having anything bigger than a city-state. Although the Greeks spread out, as I have told you, all over Greece and southern Italy and Sicily and other coasts of the Mediterranean, they did not try to have an empire or one government for all these places under their control. Everywhere they went they formed their separate city-state. In India also you will find that in the early days there were small republics or kingdoms rather like the Greek city-state. But apparently they did not last long, and they were absorbed into larger kingdoms. Even so, however, for a very long time our village panchayats had a great deal of power. Perhaps the first impulse of the old Aryans was to have small city-states wherever they went. But geographical conditions and contact with older civilizations gradually made them give up this idea in many of the countries they inhabited. In Persia especially, we find large states and empires grew up. In India also there was a tendency for larger kingdoms to grow up. But in Greece the city-state continued for long, till a Greek, famous in history, made the first attempt we know of to conquer the world. This was Alexander the Great. We shall have something to say of him later. So the Greeks refused to join their little city-states together to form a large state, kingdom or republic. Not only did they keep separate and independent, but they were almost always fighting each other. There was great rivalry between them, often resulting in war. And yet there were many common links joining these city-states together. They had a common language, a common culture and the same religion. Their religion was one of many gods and goddesses, and they had a rich and beautiful mythology like the old Hindu mythology. They worshipped the beautiful. Even now we have a few of their old statues in marble and stone, and they are wondrously beautiful. They believed in having healthy and beautiful bodies, and for this purpose organized games and races. These games used to take place from time to time on a big scale at Olympia, in Greece, and people from all over Greece gathered together there. You must have heard of the Olympic Games that take place even now. The name has been taken from the old Greek games at Olympia and applied to games and championships between different countries. So the Greek city-states lived separately, meeting each other at their games and fighting each other frequently. When a great danger came from outside, however, they united to resist it. This was the Persian invasion, about which we shall have something to say at a later stage. End of Chapter 7, titled, The Greek City-States. Chapter 8, Empires in Western Asia. January 13, 1931. It was good to see you all yesterday. But I had a shock when I saw Dadu. He was looking so weak and ill. Look after him well and make him fit and strong again. I could hardly speak to you yesterday. What can one do in a short interview? I try to make up for all the interviews and talks we have not had by writing these letters. But they are poor substitutes, and the make-believe does not last long. Still, it is good sometimes to play at make-believe. Let us go back to the ancients. We have been with the old Greeks lately. What were the other countries like about this time? We need not trouble ourselves much about the other countries of Europe. We do not, or at any rate I do not, know anything very interesting about them. The climate of Northern Europe had probably been changing, and this must have resulted in new conditions. Long ago, you may perhaps remember, it was very cold all over Northern Europe and Northern Asia. This was called the Ice Age, and huge glaciers came right down to Central Europe. Man did not exist then probably, or even if he did, he was more an animal than human. You may wonder how we can say now that there were glaciers in those days. There can, of course, be no record of them in any books, for there were no books or writers of books in those days. But you have not forgotten the book of nature, I hope. Nature has a way of writing her own history in her rocks and stones, and all who wish to may read it there. It is a kind of autobiography, that is, one's own history. Now, glaciers have a way of leaving very peculiar marks of their existence. You hardly mistake them once you get to recognize them. And if you want to study these marks, all you have to do is to go to any of our present glaciers in the Himalayas or the Alps or elsewhere. You have yourself seen the glaciers round about Mont Blanc in the Alps, but perhaps no one pointed out to you then these special marks. There are plenty of fine glaciers in Kashmir and in other parts of the Himalayas. The nearest glacier for us is the Pandari Glacier, which is about a week's march from Almora. I went there once when I was a small boy, much younger than you are now, and I still remember it vividly. Instead of history and the past, I have drifted into glaciers and the Pandari. That comes of the game of make-believe. I want, if possible, to talk to you as if you were here, and if I do so we must surely have little excursions occasionally to glaciers and the like. We started discussing glaciers because of my reference to the Ice Age. We can say that glaciers came down to Central Europe and to England, because we can still find the peculiar marks of glaciers in these countries. They are to be found on the old rocks, and this makes us think that it must have been very cold all over Central and Northern Europe then. Later it became warmer and the glaciers gradually shrank. Geologists, the people who study the history of the Earth, tell us that this cold spell was succeeded by a warm spell, when it was even warmer than it is today in Europe. Owing to this warmth, dense forests grew up in Europe. The Aryans in their wanderings reached Central Europe also. They do not appear to have done anything very remarkable there at this period, so we can for the moment ignore them. The civilized peoples of Greece and the Mediterranean probably looked upon these people of Central and Northern Europe as barbarians. But these barbarians were living a healthy and warlike life in their forests and villages, and unconsciously preparing themselves for the day when they were to swoop down and topple over the governments of the more civilized peoples of the South. But this happened long afterwards and we need not anticipate. If we know little about Northern Europe, we know nothing at all about great continents and tracts of country. America is supposed to have been discovered by Columbus, but that does not mean, as we are finding out now, that civilized people did not exist there before Columbus went there. But anyhow, we know nothing of America in those early days of which we are speaking. Nor do we know anything about the continent of Africa, Egypt of course being excepted, and also the coast of the Mediterranean. Egypt was at this period probably at the decline of her great and ancient civilization. But, even so, it was a very advanced country in those days. We have now to consider what was happening in Asia. Here, as you know, there were three centers of ancient civilization, the Mesopotamian, the Indian, and the Chinese. In Mesopotamia and Persia and Asia Minor, empire after empire came and went even in those early days. There was the Assyrian Empire, the Median, the Babylonian, and later the Persian. We need not go into the details of how these empires fought each other, or remained at peace for a while side by side, or destroyed each other. You will notice the difference between the Greek city-states and the empires of Western Asia. From very early days there appears to have been a passion for a great state or empire in these countries. Perhaps it was due to their older civilization, or there may have been other causes. One name might interest you. It is that of Croesus, of whom you must have heard. To be as rich as Croesus has become a well-known saying in English. You may also have read stories of this Croesus, of how rich and proud he was and how he was humbled. Croesus was the king of a country called Lydia, which was on the west coast of Asia, where Asia Minor is today. Being a country touching the sea, probably there was a great deal of trade there. In his time the Persian Empire under Cyrus was growing and becoming powerful. Cyrus and Croesus came into conflict and Cyrus defeated Croesus. The story of this defeat, and how in his misery wisdom and sense came to the proud Croesus, is told us by a Greek writer of history, Herodotus. Cyrus had a great empire probably extending right up to India in the east. But one of his successors, Darius, had an even greater empire. It included Egypt and a bit of Central Asia, and even a small part of India near the Indus River. It is said that a huge quantity of gold dust used to be sent to him from this Indian province of his as tribute. In those days there must have been gold dust near the Indus River. There is none to be found there now, and indeed the country is largely waste land. This shows how the climate must have changed. As you will read history and think of past conditions and compare them with present conditions, one of the things that will interest you most is the change that has taken place in Central Asia. This was the place from where issued innumerable tribes, hordes of men and women who spread out over distant continents. This was the place which had great and mighty cities in the past, rich and populous, comparable to the great European capitals of today, cities far bigger than Calcutta or Bombay today. There were gardens and greenery everywhere, and the climate was delightfully temperate, neither too cold nor too hot. All this it was. And now, for many hundreds of years it has been a bare, inhospitable country, almost a desert. Some of the great cities of the past still linger on, Samarkand or Bokhara, their very names bring up hosts of memories, but they are ghosts of their former selves. But I am again anticipating. In the ancient days which we were considering there was no Samarkand or Bokhara. All this was to come. The veil of the future hid it, and the greatness and the fall of Central Asia were still to be. End of Chapter 8, titled, Empires in Western Asia.